Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome back to A Piece of Cake. Our first, let our brother give his salams, Abdurraheem, and
Assalamu alaikum everyone. Yes, so good to be back, mashallah.
no, jazakallah khair.
And what a lovely poster. I was seeing the poster for this displayed on the full screen. It looks amazing. You know, the cogs.
It does.
And
It
yeah,
does.
mashallah.
Jazakallah khair, Hassan, for getting that one together, mashallah. Abdurraheem,
Yes, bro.
today's title, the reason I wanted to discuss today's title is because I want to ask you a series of questions and have discussions around particular points that I think is very, very necessary. I've written about this before. I've read about it in quite a lot of detail, and I've delivered my own podcast about this. But I think it's really important in this context. Now, we've been away for a while. I felt that a space, this was my doing, and for apologies to those who've not seen us for a few weeks, because I really wanted to get in a space where we could bring something new or original or reflective around what's taking place now and put that in the context of what we're about to discuss. So today, the psychosis of whiteness and its global effects. What we'll go into what that means, but first I want to give a definition of psychosis for those who are unaware of it. And the psychosis dictionary definition is a severe mental condition in which thought and emotions are so affected that contact is lost with external reality. Okay, so there are symptoms of psychosis, and I want to say, Abdurraheem, that I believe this is what's happening.
A really nice, simple definition, of psychosis is you're mad and you don't know it.
Thank you. Okay, good. Right, everyone. That's
like you think you're perfectly normal, but actually you are actually, you've lost your marbles, but you think you're perfectly rational and sane. You know, which pretty much describes exactly the whole title. It really is. But anyway, go on, bro.
Good,
for your
I think that summary there. You're mad, but you don't know it. And what I want to say then, Abdurraheem, is that's what's befallen the entire European society. That's what's I think that
Western civilization almost entirely.
That's right. So I think that psychosis is something that has continued to contribute to where we are today when we're looking at what's taking place in Palestine. And the reason I wanted to speak about that with you and I are close, mashallah, tabarakallah, and I believe that we can have a really good, transparent conversation on this. So I put out a series of posts on my social media in which after doing some rudimentary research, and I said it's important to draw parallels and note the pattern of what's taking place in the occupied territories now, the Middle East, what the IDF Israelis are doing to the Palestinians, the ongoing genocide that we're seeing and ethnic cleansing. But we need to look at other trends. So, for example, it's unsurprising that the US are supporting them because the US embarked upon this strategy to become the USA. It's unsurprising that the UK, Britain, is supporting and have it given tacit approval in other areas of the Israelis, because it was they who, via the Balfour Agreement and working with the Zionists, constructed this whole strategy around this. And it's going all the way back, right back to the Americas. This includes depopulation. This includes stripping of minerals and resources, both human and mineral resources. So my question is it really that severe that the white communities are mad and they don't know it? Or is there a willful intent behind aspects of this psychosis? There are clearly delusions of grandeur, thinking that you're still in, not you, but European society, civilization is still post-enlightenment and very close to that era. And we see that with the fourth industrial revolution, with AI and the algorithms, again, pointing to whiteness, the perfect human being white, and all of these things, and blackness being likened to animals and chimpanzees and such like. So even in the fourth industrial revolution, we're seeing this psychosis that whiteness is the measure, the medium against which the entire world must judge itself.
Yeah, I think there's truth in it. I don't think it's that black and white. ha ha ha. But no, I mean, I think that I personally, I look at it, bro, as a civilizational thing, right? More than a, more than necessarily a byproduct of color necessarily. But there is no doubt that the whole issue of whiteness has come into it. There are these very strong, there's undeniable strong racial overtones, overtones, right? And
Right.
there's this whole that underlies it. But you just need to look at two, quite extraordinary figures, yeah. Suella Braverman and Rishi Sunak. Look at them. There's nothing white about those two, yeah, but everything is white about them. I mean, they're more racist, more bigoted. They're singing the white man song louder than the white man himself can sing it. Especially Suella Braverman, like
Right.
the stuff that she's been saying is shocking to the degree, right? So I'm not really sure, like it necessarily is something so much to do with color as it is to do with civilizational ideas and values. And I guess in many ways it goes back to the Romans, it goes back to the Greeks. Again, the Romans were not in any way like, I don't even think that racism as we understand it today, at least this is what historians seem to say, didn't really exist in the same way that we understand it. But the Greeks had this idea of barbarians, but barbarians were people who couldn't speak their language, but I think there is this whole thing of civilization. This is the whole idea of these, we have these values, which which the irony is they don't even really believe in these values. It's just ridiculous. I mean, I think the whole thing that's happening now in Gaza, yeah, has really exposed to everybody, like a lot of people are waking up from their slumber, right, and saying this is just all lies and hypocrisy. Like, what are all these values and these human rights and international law, and like it's just all a lie. And a lot of white people are waking up to that, right?
Right.
But
right.
I think the title you've proposed, I think the thing about psychosis, I think that whether it's like some people call it living in the matrix,
Mm-hmm.
Meaning you're in this state of almost your mind is like captured. You're living in an alternative reality, and you don't even realize it. I think that really describes it. Really,
I
really
appreciate
well.
that.
I think there is a mass state of men like people are psychotic on a mass level. I do,
and I appreciate that, Abdurraheem, because I'm going to be coming with some aspects here. For example, one of the books I'm reading by Professor Kendi Andrews on that very title, the psychosis of whiteness is shared across all Western countries, banded together by colonial violence. Okay, this is one thing, and I wrote. I'm going to refer to when I was talking about psychosis, and there's a socio-economic, there's politics, a political aspect to this. So whiteness is actually rooted in the political economy. It is in the fabric of the institution and social life. You cannot work the natives of America to death without whiteness. You do not enslave millions of African people and kill millions more without whiteness. You do not steal resources from the places of the world you have underdeveloped and then create a system of unfair trade practices without whiteness. We do not watch the ongoing genocide and slaughter of a population that comprises half of them being children without whiteness. Okay. So there is, as you said, there is that psychotic aspect. There is that definitely a psychosis. And the question is this now. There are those, you've given a brilliant example with Suella Braverman and Rishi Sunak and even Priti Patel. But what we see is that the colonies, as you've said, and even some black leaders, they become more colonial and do the bidding of their masters, their former masters or existing masters, more than, as you said, the white man himself. They carry the white man's burden, if you want to call it that, that derogatory term about having to save the world, as they purport, more than others, like stop the boats and everything like that. But my point is now, Abdurraheem, isn't it time? We've got those speaking out, but isn't it time that not only do white counterparts speak out, but bring a counter strategy to slow the tide or halt the tide or challenge this psychosis. We see some waking up. We see not only waking up, we see conversions to Islam. We see emotional Europeans saying they cannot believe what they're seeing. But we're at the stage now when words are not enough. And I'm not advocating violence or anything like this. I'm looking at what can be done more emphatically, politically, by those who have benefited, okay, by the white privilege. What can you do with the white privilege you have collectively to thwart this tide, to deal with this?
Here's like, so I'm just sort of thinking out loud. I don't want anyone to think that these are necessarily well formulated thoughts that I've got. Obviously, anyone who becomes Muslim and is confronted by the things that Islam teaches us about racial equality, and there not being any difference between the white man, the black man, the Arab, the non-Arab, right? You know, if you have any degree of sincerity about being a Muslim, you're going to have to confront these issues. And I've talked about this myself a lot. I've talked about it's still, I still can't say 100% that it's one thing I want to say is number one is really hard. Like, I'm not trying to elicit sympathy, like maybe I am, but I would like to tell people, right, that it's really hard to get rid of it. Like, who willingly gets rid of privilege, right? Who exists in a privileged position, and then willingly just gets rid of it? Most of us spend most of our life trying to accumulate privilege in some way, shape, or form, because with it comes power and security, right? Or so you imagine. So you feel very comfortable with it. It's you know, why would you want to get rid of privilege? It's a very hard thing to do. And the other thing, it's so insidious as well. It goes so deep. It's so deeply ingrained in you. I sometimes wonder if it's ever possible to completely get rid of it. I mean, it's interesting. I was watching some YouTube videos about people who were sort of extreme narcissists, almost on a level of being, you know, psychopathic narcissists. But the interesting thing was that they'd done work with, you know, with medical professionals, with psychologists, and they'd reached the stage where they actually realized that there was something wrong with them, right? And although they couldn't change actually how their head was, they had enough intelligence to realize that the way they thought and was wrong, and they knew how to restrict their behaviors to make their behavior more acceptable. So it's like, do you understand? It's sort of weird thing. It's like fundamentally their wiring hadn't changed, but they realized that there was something wrong with the way they behaved. There was something wrong with their thinking, and they had enough intelligence to be able to recognize that and then take steps, at least in order to reduce the impact of that on others. And you know, for me, I think this is where you got to start. In a sense, you've got to. That's where you've got to start. I think. I don't imagine that being able to escape the privilege of whiteness and everything that comes with it, and the sort of psychotic, self-delusionary ideas, it's not going to be something that people are going to, you know, even if they want to let go of it, even if they recognize that it's wrong, the struggle to really eliminate it from you is maybe you can never do it, but at least you can start. And so I think, you know, I think that you know, to go back to your original question, what can we do about it? What steps can we do? What steps can we take? What things can we do? So I think the first thing is you have to sort of go back and you have to understand, where does it all come from, right? Where does this all come from? Now, you mentioned the point, Abdul Haqq, bro, about colonialism. And I think that it's impossible to talk about this subject without understanding and linking it to colonialism. And in fact, in reality, the whole of Western civilization exists because of colonialism and continues to exist in its position of privilege because of neo-colonialism. It's still going on. We, you know, like, as I've been posting about Palestine, not as much, but I have also, as people have pointed out, there are horrific things going on in Congo right now.
Right, exactly.
Terrible things going on in Congo. And obviously I haven't been, you know, not obviously necessarily, but I haven't been but I have posted it because that has to be recognized.
Right.
And it is, by the way, still part of the same process. It's still part of the colonization. It is still the exploitation of people for the benefit of Western, and you're right, basically white society and civilization. But anyway, very briefly, bro, what does it go back to? What does it go back to? I think it goes back to this. Whenever you are trying to build any society, you're trying to build a society, you have to have some ideas, something. There needs to be some glue that holds everybody together. Right? There has to be. Okay, because otherwise, what do you achieve? What drives you? What makes you go forward? I mean, we can have an argument about whether we even need that, and you know, what is it all? But the point being is that this is true, whether it's a religious, you know, whether it's Christianity, whether it's Islam, whether it's a religion, whether it's some ideology like communism, a political ideology, whatever it may be. But generally, by and large, the Western world has chosen, you know, historically, whiteness. That is actually the idea of race. Race has been, in a sense, and especially I would say, since the demise of the importance of Christianity, once Christianity lost its relevance and importance in Western society, what else was there? What is the glue that holds it all together? Right? And I think that the thing that has sort of, whether it was chosen on purpose or whether it just, you know, it's an easily, you know, it's easy to, you know, it's an easily identifiable thing. I think this idea of race and whiteness is something that has substituted it. And that's the problem. The problem is that the idea of whiteness is literally the glue that holds it all together and drives them forward in terms of being able to justify their colonization and their exploitation. This makes it even more hard and more challenging to dismantle.
That's really,
so, unless you give them another glue, right?
Right, yeah, no, that's really important, Abdurraheem. Yeah. That's really important that you've said that, and I appreciate what you're saying there. Yeah. Coming back on that, I'm going to come back to that, but I want to go back to something you said earlier on, and it's an honest statement from you, and I really appreciate you for that. Discarding or letting go of privileges, that's a really important and valuable point that you made, because no one wants to let go of privileges. We see in the Quran nations being stripped of those privileges because of sins that they were doing and of the things that they were doing wrong and everything like that. But at the same time now, I would say, and I'm talking about from a religious perspective, when individuals started abusing those privileges, okay, in the Quran, okay, historically, they were tested, tried, punished as a result of that. And we saw those privileges being revoked, as it were, or them being destroyed as a result of that. So my point today would be, do we hold on to privileges when we know that they've been achieved or acquired at the expense of others suffering? So, for example, I mentioned about the Western civilization and how that was constructed. And we look at, for example, once we see that whiteness is a societal psychosis, we can then understand that it is inoculated from all logic and evidence. So what you're saying about the glue, I think, is important. I would say that Christianity, while it was discarded post-Enlightenment, it was still an integral part to the racist apparatus that took forward the Enlightenment, eugenics came out as a result of it. We saw what happened with the Holocaust, and that was the epitome of that racist aspect for Europeans. I say epitome for them. We had a nexus and epitome with the enslavement and commodification of blackness and black people in that regard. So what you're saying is important. And I want the our viewers, and salam alaikum to all of you who've joined us. We haven't seen you for a while, and greetings in the evening to our guests, non-Muslim guests. But whiteness being the glue, despite there being any logic, despite there being any rationale to that, what is part of that glue as well, Abdurraheem? And I'll quote again, and I think you'll agree with me. Paranoia is the recurrent symptom of whiteness. There is a fear of the threat of immigrants, a fear of losing their traditions, and a fear of black and brown people in general, because whiteness is in the minority globally. Brown and black are the majority. So in order to, I think, coral and control the masses, there's got to be an element of psychoticness in itself, because like we saw what was going on in Vietnam, like we've heard of other wars where soldiers will become drunk or drug crazed because they couldn't deal with the reality of what they were doing to fellow human beings. So I'm not saying that extends in its entirety to whiteness.
I want to pick up on the last point. So I'm not sure I agree with the fact that it's a minority, a thing about being in a minority. Yeah. I don't think that is the fundamental issue here, right? Because I think the real issue, the real problem is the last point that you made. It is the guilt. It is the deep guilt of knowing the crimes that you've committed.
Right.
And that, I know people would say, oh, it's not an Islamic term. Yeah. But whatever we call it, right. But, it's called karma, right. Or at least I don't mean it necessarily. I mean it in the colloquial, the common parlance, that what it means is what comes around goes around. When you dish out rubbish, when you dish out crap to people, it's going to come right back in your face. Sooner or later, it will come back to you. Yeah. Meaning, that I think everyone knows deep down inside, you are not going to get away with your crimes, right? I mean, you personally may not, but it is going to be visited, if not upon you, upon your descendants. And that there's this innate sense that there is going to be justice. And I think this is the thing, is that, the white man knows they'll talk about, oh, immigrants, this and that, and blah, blah, blah. But even me, I'm sitting there thinking, don't you know what we have done to people? Don't you know what the British Empire has done? Don't you know what European colonialism, by the way, not has done, is still doing now?
Right.
That, we still find France still, alhamdulillah, they got chucked out of
Niger.
Niger or wherever it was recently at last. But some African countries are still paying reparations. They're still paying the flipping French.
Right.
Still paying them.
That's right.
For the privilege of being colonized, and then paying them to leave. And but we've left you all of this stuff. You have to pay for it now. And
Abdurraheem, can I interject? And I want to read something. I want to read something that supports what you're saying. Again, from my research, if white people were to acknowledge their role in the world, the blood and destruction upon which their liberty was built, then the whole system would come tumbling down. So whiteness becomes ingrained in not only the political economy, but also intellectual ideas. The Enlightenment provides the knowledge necessary for science and progress in Europe, while at the same time cementing the hierarchy of whiteness in how we understand the world. Whiteness is in the DNA of the social system. Therefore, overcoming whiteness is impossible because it is a product of the social condition, a psychosis caused to ensure the system remains intact. And the last sentence here, there is no reasoning with a psychosis, just as there is no point in engaging in a rational debate with whiteness. And if we look at what we're seeing today, and this is what everyone's looking at, Abdurraheem, the madness of nation states supporting the butchering, the barbarism, the ethnic cleansing. We're watching it. We're seeing dead babies. We saw babies being left because no electricity, and when they revisited the ICU, they saw that animals had been eating at the flesh of those young babies. This is disgusting. Today, I was watching on Al Jazeera, and I like to read between the lines, but one of the reporters was in a graveyard that had just been bombed by the IDF, and they had Israeli Defense Force had just been there with their bulldozers. They'd excavated some of the graves, Abdurraheem, and you see the bodies there, and they took some of those bodies, which feeds into recent revelations that Palestinians are their organs are being harvested, tested, everything. So my thing, this is what I'm saying. You must be in a psychosis to not respond to that, to not see that this is not the right to defend yourself. This is barbarism, butcherism.
Bro, listen, like just Tiss is saying, I feel saying whiteness is psychosis is dangerous and maybe racist. Yeah. But so what do you mean when you say whiteness, bro? I think it's good to define to everybody, right? Maybe your terms. When you say whiteness, like explain to everyone what you mean, because you don't necessarily mean just a skin color, right?
No.
It's not. When we say whiteness, we don't. There are people in the far north of, I think it's Norway, right? What they call the they're blonde-haired, blue-eyed, but they're natives. They're actually the native, like that's proper native people, right?
Right.
Who are also horrifically treated,
Yes.
Although they're very white, But the point being is that they're not, the right type of white. So what do you mean, bro? Explain
Very
to
good
everyone,
question.
because it's not a racist term, is it?
Good. No, it isn't. Let's look at this. And I want to put the context, because you gave that context excellently earlier on. When we're talking about whiteness, you spoke immediately about Suella Braverman and Rishi Sunak. Let's look at whiteness, what is the polar opposite of blackness. And both these terminologies evolved in the US as they started commodifying Africans as a product. And when they did that, initially they had a problem, because they had indentured servants who were Irish, who were in the fields with the black Africans. So when they were revolting, when the Africans were revolting, the Irish were with them. When they were running away, the Irish were with them. But what did they then do? They saw they had a problem in this commodification, and they said to the whites, Irish, they said, you are also white. Okay, they didn't understand that. When that language came back to Europe, the Europeans didn't understand it. What is this whiteness? But when they classified, saying black is African phenotype in this particular regard, they're a commodity, and then they started giving more rights, affording more rights to the Irish. Remember, there was still a hierarchy of whiteness, with the Portuguese, the Spanish, those from the Mediterranean seen as more inferior to the English because of phenotype. But the whiteness and blackness became a construct to deal with privilege, to deal with subjugation, to deal with commodities in that regard. So you're absolutely right. So why do we see the Irish united with the Palestinians in the struggle? Why do we see the South Africans taking Israel to court, and we see them supporting? Because whiteness is a construct of socio-political, economic, that has something to do with phenotype, but phenotype is just a component of the overall structure. So I hope, Justice, you're clear on that.
I do really think that it, like I said, what is the glue that holds their civilization together? And I think you have to go back to the Enlightenment. You have to go back to science and the misuse of science. You have to go back to Darwin. And you just look at the racist statements of Darwin.
Can you read what that? Do me a favor, Abdul. Can you read? Because I can't see much on my phone. Can you?
Sorry to break it to you, Abdul Haqq, but there are plenty of black Israelis.
There are. Thanks. No, and you don't have to apologize. I'm glad that you're highlighting that, because when we look at the Israelis, when we want to look at some of the original Jews, I've spoken about this, Daniel. We're talking about. So let's be clear. and the Ashkenazi Jews aren't the original Jews. We've got Yemeni Jews, we've got Jews still in Iran, we've got African Jews, we've got the Falasha Jews who were airlifted into Israel. So there are a lot of black Jews there.
And by the way, you don't need to be white to be a tool of whiteness. You don't need to be white to be used by white people as a colonial settler state in order to further their own political and economic interests. The Jews are just being used. That's it.
And Abdurraheem,
it's a useful tool.
To answer that as well, what you've said, let me put it quite clearly here so that there should be no. I'm surprised that others aren't looking at the context of what we're discussing, and I'm talking to you, quintessential white British, and I think you would have thrown me under the bus to have the hack. This is racist or whatever. But listen here, whiteness is a set of ideas produced by the racist political and economic system, and as long as that system remains intact, it will continue to reproduce delusions that prevent all of us from seeing the brutal reality of the social order we inhabit. There is no reasoning with whiteness. Instead, we must destroy the system that creates it. So it's a set of ideas. We've already talked about brown people who subscribe to them. Look at India and their Aryan caste system and how they align with Donald Trump. Look at some of the black phenotypes, if you want, in Africa who hold this colonial standard against everyone else, and because they feel they're better. We saw in Rwanda when we saw the Tutsis and the Hutus, what we saw there was one ethnicity was told they were white in mind and in their way, and so that bred hatred and then subsequent genocide down the years from the masses who were the subjugated masses, thinking these individuals believe that they have a whiteness in what? The system, in the hierarchy, in the order of things. So I hope that we're really clear on this when we're talking about whiteness. Now, you're saying why not just talk about colonialism? Because whiteness is the overarching factor that caused the division.
Yeah, you can't, guys, listen, you can't dismiss the racial factor. Like, let's just put it that way. The racial factor is there. So let's just take it back. We go to Darwin, we go to his idea of evolution. He had some very racist ideas. And literally black men, black people, black women, black people from Africa were monkeys in the trees. They just come down for you. You still hear people saying this crap. Excuse my language. You still hear people saying this disgusting rubbish. Yeah, you still hear them saying this in Europe. They still say it, and this is where it came from. These ideas have been imbibed and impregnated because they're not Christian ideas. They're whatever. This is the glue that holds this pretty horrific civilization together, right? And allows them to exploit people in the same way, by the way, that you see this dehumanization taking place by the present extreme right-wing Israeli government, but it's been going on in Israel, of the Palestinians, the dehumanization, just as the Germans dehumanized the Jews, right? It's the dehumanization. Yes, they are human, but even black people, again, Abdul was talking about this, the slave trade and all of these things that were even arguing whether black people had souls or not, whether they were actually really human. This is stuff that people believed and were taught and were conditioned with. And you still will find people saying this stuff today. It hasn't gone away.
As you said, Abdurraheem, as you said, look at what the dehumanization of what's taking place of the Palestinians now. Okay, that comes from a paradigm of whiteness. We can't just say, oh, colonialism and colonialism was that and it's got nothing to do with color. I would say, and I'm not saying this about justice or anyone who's saying that, when we look at some of the counter arguments, it confirms that the psychosis stays there. You have got black people among us saying, what's all the fuss about? And you had statements. Remember Kanye West saying that 400 years of slavery sounds like a choice to me. You've got black people saying that, do you know what? It was good that we became slaves. When I was in Sri Lanka and I went and did some lectures there and workshops, I remember being taken about in one of the taxis and then the tuk-tuks, and the individual speaking is like, we miss our former colonial masters who were superior, because since they went, we haven't been able to flourish in the same sort of manner. So you've got individuals who have that whiteness of mind, and they don't have the phenotype of white. So we cannot escape from the whiteness. Going back to the dehumanization, we saw that happening with Africans. We saw the very people who are doing that to the Palestinians now, Zionists, Israelis. We saw the dehumanization at the turn of the century in the UK, Abdurraheem. Not forget just Germany, how they were looked and viewed upon, and how they gathered in East London to be safe as a sort of ghetto in those days there. That was because of the psychosis, that whiteness, and that framework through which everyone else was looked at. And it does continue today. It's so important that everyone understands that. We get sensitive. And I'm going to repeat what I've said. I dare say that sensitivity around, should we call it whiteness is racism? That's part of our psychosis, people. That's part of our psychosis. Especially those of us who don't come from those ethnicities or phenotypes, or say, oh no, you can't do that. Is that because we are so psychotic with whiteness? And remember, Abdurraheem, and I'll say this to many of you, we see Asians, South Asians, we see black people, we see from always talking and boasting about their proximity to whiteness. What is that? My proximity to whiteness gives me privilege. There goes another psychosis. When we see after World War II, for example, with the Germans, with the Nazis, should I say, where did they go to? What did we see also around Europe? They were sending European populations to South America, to Latin America, with what intention? You can research this, Abdurraheem, to depopulate the black and indigenous populations. They wanted a white Latin America because of the resources that had been discovered there. You know, so we've got to be really careful when we're trying to minimize what whiteness is. I've brought academic references to what whiteness is. You've brought socio-economic, post-enlightenment, colonial, showing how much they're entwined with each other. Viewers, make no mistake when we're talking about this, just like when we talk about blackness and what that means as a commodification. And you all know, when we look at blackness and the term blackness now, it's associated with evil, with fear, with negativity, with backwardness. When we associate anything with whiteness, we associate purity, advancement, intelligence, such and such. How can we just say, oh no, it's not, we shouldn't use the term whiteness? Definite psychosis.
Well, I mean, I think obviously, look, it's on one hand, let's give credit to people, in the sense that, you know, people naturally, not naturally, but you know, racism is not nice. Racism is not pretty. And when I say racism, I don't mean it in the necessarily here in the oppressive political sense of racism, where one race exploits another. I mean racism in the very, you know, we've had this discussion before, but the idea that, well, even the idea of race, okay, because I don't even believe in the idea of race. I don't believe it has it doesn't even have any scientific merit.
No, there's only one race.
You know, as we pointed out before, is, for example, I think the genetic variation between, you know, people, you know, in a certain part of West Africa is more than the genetic variation between them and some Europeans, right? I mean, it's like, from a scientific point of view, race doesn't exist. There is no scientific basis for race. It's literally, well, it is a psychosis. It's literally a psychosis. It's a madness, right? Children do not see, they don't even see it. They don't even, it doesn't mean they don't see it. It doesn't exist for them. You have to put this idea into their heads. So it's great that people feeling uncomfortable with this conversation.
Yes.
May Allah bless you. It's really good. And I get your discomfort. You feel fundamentally that, you know, we shouldn't be accusing white people, but what else are you going to call it? I mean, honestly, putting it in its historic, look, I'll be honest that I do feel there is a possibility of, you know, a backlash of things going if you, I do see the danger, for example, of turning this thing into a white black thing, of just having, you know, just flipping the coin, and then, you know, everyone getting racist towards white people, right? Now,
and they shouldn't. They shouldn't.
Although on one hand, yeah, you know, white privilege, I believe it's real. I believe white privilege is a real thing, yeah. And it's something that should be dispensed with, but it doesn't mean we go in the opposite direction,
No,
right?
you're
So
right.
now, for example, right, if, just say, for example, right, and this crosses my mind sometimes, I wonder, sometimes I think, am I being deplatformed by some Muslims because I'm white? Right? Like, there were things that I used to get invited to, you know, and I noticed, by the way, there are no white faces in those conferences anymore, right?
Or black.
Or black. But no, there's sometimes that thing. But yeah, you might be right about that. But the point being is that, what is that about? Because you don't want to go from one thing to the other. It's like, it doesn't matter whether you're white or black or brown or whatever. It doesn't matter. What is important is, are you speaking the truth? Are you saying something that's useful to people, that is beneficial? This is what we need to do. But the problem is, brothers and sisters listening, what do you want to call it? How do you want to describe it? Because historically and until today, it still exists. Whiteness has been used and is still used as a means of control and domination over people. It's just, it seems to me an undeniable fact.
Look at the Middle East.
And the
Look
fact
at the
that
Middle
some
East
people,
now.
the fact that some people are, you know, not grasping it shows how deep the psychosis goes. Because what it is that some people who are not white have the same psychosis themselves.
Thank you. And Abdurraheem, look, it says here, look, one of the things here, white supremacy now necessitates delusional thinking in order to sustain itself. Okay, so you can, some rationality may come into it, but look at what we are. I'm going to come back to why we're talking about this now. Look at what we are witnessing now across our screens like never before, and look at some of the conversations. So Abdurraheem, we've seen, what is it, 22,000 dead, over half of them babies and children, and then you hear statements, they have the right to defend themselves. That's one. That's not defense. You go back to their own religious tenets, okay, and you've got Orthodox Jews quoting those, and you've got even the reference to Amalek from Netanyahu, but then they're silent about an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, which is in their book, in the Torah, which is in our book. You know, proportionate responses. We are seeing disproportionate responses, and yet we're seeing support for that, saying until Hamas are destroyed, until Hamas are destroyed, okay, you want to take out Hamas, but you're still negotiating with them regarding releases of hostages. This is delusional. Do you understand what I'm saying? So Abdurraheem, these are the sorts of things we're seeing, and we're seeing almost senile leaders supporting it, saying, I saw videos of the beheaded babies, which is a lie, which wasn't there. But you say it often enough, it becomes truth. We know that. You say it often enough, and the media is a powerful tool, and we know how it's manipulated, and that's what's taking place. And we're feeding into those delusions. Some don't like social media because there are alternative avenues that are reporting, bringing alternative stories. They get shut down. We know that many are being ghosted, we're shadow banned. We're seeing all of that now, even the algorithms being changed, and we heard Facebook are muting pro-Palestinian things. We're seeing language around pro-Palestinian support and ceasefire. Individuals have lost their jobs because they said ceasefire now. If we are not in a psychosis at the moment, and it's a psychosis, not a psychosis of blackness, because the black civilizations or the African and brown civilizations are not predominating. But let's check this, Abdurraheem. This is allowing the genocide in Sudan to continue. because we've got those who are ethnically Arabs originally taking advantage of this. This is part of the whiteness. You've mentioned the DRC, okay, Congo. That's part of the psychosis of whiteness. We're seeing a very anti-Muslim campaign at the behest of the leader of India and what's happening there to Indian minorities that are taking place in that regard there. China, with regards to what it's doing to his Uyghurs, and we're seeing others remaining silent on that. These are all strategies, okay, that emanate from that construct of whiteness, that privilege and that subjugation, institutional.
Yeah, but if you're meaning that whiteness is just another term for ideas of racial superiority, I think, because I think the case in China with the Uyghurs, the issue is of the Han Chinese. It's not a whiteness thing. It's because, again, you see, they've tried to make the glue that holds their whole system together a racial identity, right? So the problem when you do that, when you make it a racial identity, then inevitably you're going to start dehumanizing those people who do not belong to that racial identity.
Right.
So I don't know, racism can't be a completely new thing, right? It's not a completely new thing, because then what would it mean when the Prophet said, why would the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam say there's no difference between an Arab and a non-Arab? There's no difference between a black and a white. Why would the Prophet say that? Because these racial issues existed even in the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? So we know what happened with was it Mu'adh ibn Jabal? Who was it? Who called Bilal? Was it Mu'adh? Was it
Abu Sa'id
al-Khudri? Whoever called Bilal, you son of a black woman, and the Prophet said to him, you still have jahiliyyah in you, So he put his face on the ground. He said, I'm not gonna take my face off the ground until you've trodden like Bilal, right? So it's like he wanted to get rid of this, but so it existed. This sort of racist, racial identity. As I said, the Greeks, they call people barbarians, people who are not Greeks. So, maybe the Romans were a bit different. Maybe they were more, I don't know.
They were. The Romans were different. As you said, they defined racism because you had black Caesars, emperors. We look at how Africa got the Afrikaners. But I think that what you're saying resonates, Abdurraheem. I think the point that we need to look at is whiteness as it emerged as a construct, and it's still been, and what it does, it's been able to do in becoming systemized and institutional. You don't talk about color because there are apparatus there that are already in place to subjugate, to marginalize, to recognize privileges for others, whereas others don't get the same thing. That's what we need to keep speaking about, because again, listen to the language of the Israeli leadership, where they're saying this is another 9/11. They're leaning into other things that have taken place, but notice no one can mention or equate what we're seeing to Nazi Germany, because then you become criminalized. How did that happen? And we hear others still trying to criminalize language today, as I've mentioned earlier. So my point is, that comes from a place of whiteness, because now, as we've seen in France, and it was legislation in America, that if anti-Zionism equates to anti-Semitism. So if you say anything that is against Zionism, you are anti-Semitic. Abdurraheem, that is a psychotic analysis, because the definitions are made very, very clear. And we know that with Herzl, who was the father of Zionism, he was an atheist, had nothing to do even with the Jewish faith. And this is why we see Orthodox Jews standing in solidarity with...
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of Jews who are flabbergasted by this claim that, they themselves are saying, so we're Jewish, but we're anti-Semitic. We're Jewish who are anti-Jewish because we're not Zionists, so we're not pro-Zionist. Makes absolutely no sense at all. It's
no, you're right. And
but I think the thing that some people may be struggling with is, which I mean, I get it, right? But is the term whiteness. But I keep challenging people, what other term do you want to use? You know,
Right.
do you just want to call it racism or white supremacist racism? You know, maybe it needs more qualification than just being called whiteness. Yeah.
But that definition that I provided earlier on, I think, is there. It's a construct that has continued to develop, and we see societies taking advantage of that. We see individuals who don't happen to be white, who have this psychosis of this Europeanized civilizational construct that they're implementing against their own communities. And it's something that can only be done from a place of power. And those who are receptive or who benefit from it are those who are identified by that very structure that privileges them. So you can have, for example, you can have that white construct in an African society, and we do have it there. And that recognizes the elite who benefit financially, yes, politically, from that whiteness of the construct of society. It has elements of colonialism in it, and colonialism more than likely was the forebear of that particular whiteness. So you have those in black society at the upper echelons living, speaking, behaving that way, and they connect with others who may be in India, who may be in America, who do have racist tendencies, but because of that whiteness as an ideology, they all relate. That's why the Aryan Indians can relate with the white supremacists in America, and Trump was happy to host Modi in that regard there. It is whiteness, Abdurraheem. Colonialism may be an intrinsic part to it. Racism is an intrinsic part to it, but it's that whiteness that is allowing what we're seeing taking place at the moment to take place in different parts of the world, particularly what we're seeing in the Middle East and parts of Africa. And the psychosis is the failure to even recognize that we are suffering from it.
Yeah. I think, you know, I totally get what you're saying. And not that I disagree. I just, you know, I sort of tuning into people's discomfort. Not necessarily my discomfort, by the way, right? But of specifying the fact that it is whiteness, because it seems to me that all that has really been done is that racism, you know, whiteness. Like I said, I think the problem is that maybe the term whiteness is too broad, and you know, it's not. You know, it's not clinical enough. It's painting too broad a brush. As you yourself pointed out, by the way, the Irish are perfect, very white people, right? Yet they were also subject to, well, I mean, they became part of this experiment of their whiteness was used in order to turn them against people who they were formerly, you know, allied with and suffering together with. But I don't know. I mean, at the end of the day, the terms are there. I think that maybe you have to be conscious when you're using that term to a wider audience, because you're a doctor, you're a professor, so you know you are used to, you understand things within the context of your academic skill set and your academic. But then the thing is, often what happens is when we, you know, then carry that forward into the public, they don't understand what you understand. I understand it. I totally get where it's coming from. I understand the points of reference, and I can understand, and I can see why. Well, like I'm saying, what other term do you want to use?
Yeah. But again, so no, thank you for that, and I will take that advice from you, and viewers, please understand. Look, I'm talking with Abdurraheem. I've got children that are half whites, for example, with Jewish heritage in that regard. Some with Asian heritage in that regard. Abdurraheem, I know your son-in-laws you've talked about. My son-in-laws are not all from the African continent in that instance, Indian, Arab in that regard. And I'm doing that thing like, oh, I don't like white people, but my best friend is white. I'm not coming from that perspective, but I want to repeat that point. Whiteness is a set of ideas produced by racist political and economic systems. I repeat, it's a set of ideas produced by racist, political, and economic systems. And Abdurraheem, you've elucidated really well on showing how post-enlightenment and the glue that sticks is that whiteness that holds these political, economic systems in place. So viewers, please understand this. The discomfort you're feeling, I'm going to be cheeky here. Maybe it's because we're realizing that we all have a psychosis, and we're doing cold turkey. You know,
I think the crazy thing is that, you know, it's not just white people.
Exactly.
Right. It's not just white people. It goes really deep, and it goes deep because it was Justice. Justice pointed this out. He made a very interesting comment. And I don't know if it was just being he was a bit of being a bit of an agent provocateur, or if he really believed it. But it's fine. It was a very interesting comment, and it's interesting from the point of view of that a lot of people believe what he said, and it's what seems to be apparent. Okay.
Can you read it out, Abdurraheem?
Yeah. So I don't remember, but he basically was saying it was, you know, it was a classic trope that basically all the things you enjoy in life right now, your freedoms, your technology, all the life that you enjoy comes from whiteness. So what are you talking about? Yeah. And so the point being here is that, you know, that which is a very important comment to address. I didn't want to let that go. And so the point being is that it's not completely, so whiteness gave you every luxury you enjoy today. There you go. We invented the rule of law, the Industrial Revolution, the pampered lifestyle you lead, and modern medicine that keeps the third world alive.
That's very provocative. Thank you for reading it.
It's
and I will address after you.
It's provocative, but it is exactly, well, that is exactly part, that this statement is evidence of the psychosis of whiteness.
Exactly.
Because just literally to be able to say that and believe that, you actually need to be a little bit mad, right? But the problem is this, is that like every great lie, every great lie has bits and pieces of truth in it, right?
Yeah.
So the thing is, no one can deny, right, the advances in technology that have happened, right? And what the West has achieved in terms of technology. But it's very interesting because I commented on a thread recently where a professor was commenting on how they did a study of 500 years of the words that are used in Western literature. Can you imagine 500 years? They ran it through a computer program, to analyze the theme of the words, right?
Okay.
And what they found was that words were talking generally about, you know, civilization, and they have become more cautious, more cautionary. They have become less enthusiastic for change. They've become, more risk averse. And what is pointed out is that actually, when people are less risk averse, they're more ready to, experiment and to lose things in order to gain something. That's what drives innovation forward.
Right.
And when people become risk averse, innovation stops.
Right.
So the guy was saying, that was really good. And then he makes this comment that, okay, well, we have to be careful not to lose this. But the interesting thing is that a lot of people were commenting and saying, well, wait a minute, hold on. Right. Do you really think that everything that the Western civilization has produced is so great? Yeah. Number one, like, look at the devastation it's caused. Look at the bloodshed. Look at the wars. And this is the point that I made. The point that I made is that this advancement is built off colonization. It's built off blood and exploiting others. Right. How about the First and Second World War? How about the Holocaust? How about colonization? Right. So all of these things that you can mention here, right? But it is built on the misery of others.
So Abdurraheem,
And
can I
those
come in there?
others are not white people.
Right.
They tend to be
and
black people and brown people and yellow people. And you just can't, guys, brothers and sisters, we can't just avoid this fact. Right?
And Abdurraheem, to add to that, so you've mentioned that, and Jazakallah khair. So to show why this is a psychosis of whiteness perspective without going against justice, I think it's a brilliant statement you've made to really bring things to the fore. But I've got here before me 47 black inventors. 47. Okay. There's more. So who invented the 3-light traffic signal? Did you know it was Garrett Morgan? Have you heard of George Washington Carver, Lewis Howard Latimer, Frederick McKinley Jones, Marie Van Britten Brown, Alexandra Miles, Granville Woods, Patricia Barr, Lonnie Johnson, Mark Dean, Sarah Boone, Henry Blitt? I can go on and on. But the psychosis of whiteness,
all a product of whiteness, bro.
The psychosis of whiteness makes sure that you don't even recognize anyone else except whiteness. Yeah. That's what psychosis
And that's true.
does.
You can't think of it. And here's the crazy thing is that you almost can't imagine. Oh, Abdul Haqq's gone. That's a shame. It's almost like
I'm here. Carry on.
It's literally almost like you hit the nail on the head, bro. It's almost like you can't imagine a black face, a black person, a brown person inventing anything like that. You almost can't imagine it in your head. Think about, honestly,
that's the psychosis.
That's be honest, right?
Who invented the light bulb? Who invented the light bulb? There's so much. Who was the one? Who were the women?
We lost you, bro. We've lost the sound. Just as it was getting exciting. I think, brothers and sisters, until Abdul Haqq comes back, I mean, think about that. I think it's very powerful. Unless you're educated like Abdul Haqq, who has taken the time to study and to find out about inventors, people who made massive contributions to science and technology who are not white, but in our head, it's probably true, isn't it? In your head, when you think about these inventions, as Justice has pointed out, whiteness, he said, has given all of these things, right? Because that's how we've been made to think. That's how we've been made to think. And this is exactly what Abdul Haqq is going on about when he talks about the psychosis. When he talks about the psychosis of whiteness, it's this inability to see almost anything outside of that. And I think for me, one of the key components of this inability to see anything outside that whiteness is the almost complete inability and refusal to acknowledge how much and how many of exactly the things that Justice just mentioned about the rule of law, right? Well, I think, you need to be like me and study some medieval history if you want to know about the rule of law. If you want to know about just the idea that you could be a person from anywhere, from any part of society, and you could do any job that you like. Where did that come from? Where did these ideas come from of social, even the ideas, you're going to be surprised, of women having rights? Where did these ideas come from? I'm going to tell you something shocking. The shocking thing to most people is this came from the world of Islam. This came from the civilization of Islam. Even many of the so-called enlightenment ideas and even the works of the Greek philosophers came from the writings and the thinkings of Muslims. Even science, what we know as the scientific methodology, came from the world of Islam. Now, yes, they didn't develop it in the way that it's been developed in the West. That's not the point. It's the absolute refusal, point blank refusal, to even acknowledge that contribution and that symbiosis that took place between those civilizations and how one led to the other, as if white people and whiteness just invented all of this out of nowhere. It didn't happen like that. That's not how history happens. That's not how civilizations change, right? But what they do is they take what happened in Europe is they took these ideas and literally, by the way, in some cases, literally took the works of Muslim scientists and put their names to it, put their own names, took their works and put their names, including Newton and some top scientists. This is what they did early, the early scientists. They took the idea of Muslim writers, took their works and just put their name, plagiarized it completely. So this is the point, right? It's this, you know, I think it's a very powerful look. The least we can say, the last thing we can say, Abdul Haqq, bro. It's a shame you got cut off just so you were getting excited. But I was just, you know,
as I do.
But the really the final thing we can say is, brothers and sisters, think about this deeply. It is something you need to think about deeply. Every one of us, all of us, we need to examine ourselves. We need to look at our motivations. We need to think about the things that influence us and make us think the way they do and question those things. We really do need to think about it. And I think looking at the comments, you know, have been fantastic. And the discussion has been a very, very powerful one. I've got to thank Abdul Haqq for introducing. I was a bit anxious, but as usual, I do find myself agreeing with him. And again, I put a challenge out there for, you know, us normal folk who are not, you know, who are not academics like Dr. Baker. Is, okay, so what term do we use? If we don't use the term whiteness, what term do we use? Because it seems to me that it describes it pretty well. And that's I think that's my last words, Abdul Haqq, bro. I'm sure you got some beautiful.
No, you summed it up really well. I think what you've asked them to consider, and I'd say to viewers, I've looked at this a lot, and I wanted to do this with Abdurraheem because I felt that even if he didn't get it and he pushed back, he will push back with a constructive response for me to take into consideration. This is not to do with racism and the inverted racism that was just mentioned by Justice as it relates to critical race theory. Maybe we'll look at that another time. And it's this point that we need to look at with regards to any psychosis we may have. When we feel or hear things that are uncomfortable, that are pushing back in a context or an environment that we have taken for granted and we're comfortable in, whether we're black, white, or whatever, we need to ask ourselves, why are we feeling so uncomfortable with that? Is there some legitimacy to what's being said? And as Abdurraheem has asked, is there an alternative context to bring? We've got academics like Robin DiAngelo. Okay, please read her book on white fragility. She's a white academic. She's done some fantastic work, and there are many others. And when you read them, I was like, oh, white people are looking introspectively in this way, just like we as Muslims have to look introspectively at what's happening at the Palestinians. When we're saying they're being tested, I saw one woman, may Allah bless her, she said, no, the rest of you, the rest of the world, you Muslims, you're being tested, okay, with what is happening to us. What are you doing with regards to your own selves, with regards to your own morals, with regards to your own deen? And a lot of us who are doing more than, a lot of tears are being shed, a lot of frustrations there about what can we do. We can do according to those three levels: enjoining good and forbidding evil. We don't resort to the least one, hating in our heart. We only resort to that if we're unable to do anything else. Some of you are boycotting. Some of you are speaking out. Some of you using your social media platforms. The point of the matter is, many of us are feeling discomfort in this particular moment because what we're seeing happening to the Palestinians, if that was meted out on us, we wouldn't last for a moment, because we do not have the level of iman and faith that they have. And that discomfort that we've got is a good discomfort, so long as we are going to be galvanized to do something about it, even if it means recognizing that we've been fed lies, recognizing that we're following or living in a construct that has provided that psychosis in which we're living. And I'll conclude there. Abdurraheem, Jazakallah khair.
It's been brilliant, bro. One of our best, I think. This was really interesting, mashallah. And a big thanks to the comments, all of you who commented. Some really excellent comments that actually really just helped the discussion. As you guys, you know, thanks for joining us. Thanks for commenting. Thanks for joining in on the discussion. It's been another really thought-provoking piece of cake.
And until next week,
Until next time, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum from me.